Her true story from North Carolina. My daughter-in-law tossed my suitcase and said, "Stay in your lane," so I took the family heirlooms and walked out. She wanted tradition gone. I took it with me. "You jerk! We don't need this dusty stuff, Iris. Seriously. It's 2025. People don't care about dead people's recipes and old trinkets anymore. You always make everything about the past." It happened on a Saturday afternoon during what was supposed to be a warm family gathering at my son's house in Raleigh, North Carolina. The sky outside was a soft southern blue, and the air smelled of grilled chicken and fresh-cut grass. I had worn my best navy skirt, the one Henry always said brought out the silver in my hair. In my lap, I carried a worn wooden box, my grandmother's. It held the stories of 4 generations of our family. Wedding photos from the 1800s, hand-inked ledgers from a time when everything was written in cursive and meant to last, and one necklace, turquoise, with a small silver clasp, that had been passed down from mother to daughter, a quiet promise between women. My name is Iris May Whitfield, and on that day, I was erased. Inside the house, children were squealing, running past me with frosting on their cheeks, chasing bubbles from a machine that puffed like a factory chimney. My son, Jacob, gave me a quick nod from the patio where he was talking to one of his co-workers. He was wearing sunglasses, the kind that make you look like you're always just a little too busy to see someone properly. "Happy to see you, Mom," he'd said earlier when I arrived. But he hadn't meant it. He hadn't offered to carry my box. He hadn't asked what was in it. I made my way into the living room and placed the box on the coffee table. Everyone else was in the kitchen or the backyard, so I took a moment to carefully open the lid. The scent of cedar wafted up. I pulled out the photograph first. My great-grandparents on their wedding day, stiff-backed and serious in black and white. Then came the blue notebook with the soft leather cover, the one that held birth dates, recipes, and a list of every family heirloom and who it had belonged to. The necklace was wrapped in linen. I held it up to the light. "This necklace crossed wars, weddings, and one hurricane," I began, raising my voice a little so the group could hear me. I smiled and looked around the room, hoping someone might lean in, ask a question, show curiosity. I wanted to tell them about how my grandmother wore it while waiting for my grandfather to return from the Pacific, about how my mother wore it to her first job interview, how I wore it the day Jacob was born, a thread of memory, strong and beautiful. But before I could say another word, Jenna, my daughter-in-law, walked in, holding a tray of wine glasses and rolling her eyes so hard I could practically hear it. "Oh my God," she muttered loud enough for everyone to hear. "Are we doing this again?" I blinked. "Jenna," she set the tray down with a clink. Her voice was cold. "We don't need this dusty stuff, Iris. Seriously. It's 2025. People don't care about dead people's recipes and old trinkets anymore. You always make everything about the past." I straightened my spine, still holding the necklace. "These aren't trinkets. They're our history." Jenna scoffed, then looked around as if expecting backup. No one said anything. Not Jacob, not even the kids, who had stopped running and now stood near the hallway, curious. Jenna crossed her arms. "Stay in your lane, Iris." I felt it like a slap. The weight of those words landed hard and sharp. My heart fluttered, but I kept my face still. "Excuse me?" I said softly. She didn't even flinch. "You come in here with that box every holiday, trying to make everyone feel guilty or nostalgic or whatever. We're not living in the 1900s anymore. No one cares about your pearls of wisdom or your old casserole dish or whatever you're trying to hand down." I glanced at Jacob, hoping he would say something, anything, but he just looked at his shoes. He looked like a child again, like the boy who once gave me a lopsided macaroni necklace and told me I was his favorite person in the world. That boy would have defended me. This man, he just stood there. I did not cry. Instead, I looked down at the box. With trembling fingers, I began to repack each item. The photos, the notebook, the necklace, wrapped again in linen. I placed them gently, reverently. I had carried this box through funerals, through births, through lonely Christmas mornings when no one called. But this moment, this silence in the living room, hurt more than any of them. I turned to lift the box when I heard a sharp thump. I looked toward the front door. Jenna was standing over my suitcase. She had taken it from the guest room and thrown it out onto the front porch like a bag of trash. The zipper had popped slightly. My nightgown was sticking out. "And take this junk with you," she said, "We're done pretending like this is your home." No one stopped her. No one helped me. I walked to the door, stepped over my own belongings. I lifted the suitcase by its cracked handle and wheeled it slowly down the porch steps. The wheels wobbled over the uneven bricks. Behind me, the sounds of music and laughter resumed. It was as if I had never been there at all. I placed the suitcase in the back of my car. Then I opened the passenger door and gently laid the box on the seat beside me. I sat behind the wheel, both hands gripping it like a lifeline. Still, I did not cry. I sat there, looking at the house, at the windows I had once helped paint, the garden I had once planted violets in. I wondered if they would notice when the violets did not bloom this year. Then I said it, out loud, just once. "So this is how names are tossed away." I backed out of the driveway. I drove slowly, the box beside me, full of stories no one wanted to hear. But I would remember them, and one day someone would. When Henry passed away, the silence in our house grew unbearable. After 50 years of marriage, you do not simply learn to live alone, you learn to carry echoes. I tried. For 2 years I tried. I sat in that rocking chair every evening, listening to the clock tick, the wind rustle through the screen door, and the quiet grow heavier with every breath. So I made a decision. I sold our house in Wilmington and moved closer to Jacob, my only son. It made sense at the time. He had just started a new job. Jenna was pregnant with their second child. "You'll be close to the grandkids," Jacob had said. "We'd love to have you nearby." At the time, I believed him. What I did not tell anyone was that the house they now lived in, that grand colonial in Raleigh with its white columns and wraparound porch, was in my name. Jacob's credit was damaged after a layoff and some missed mortgage payments. I had stepped in without hesitation, writing the check, securing the deed, and handing them the keys. Jenna had thanked me then, with a stiff hug and a lukewarm smile. But her voice had held no warmth. For the next 7 years, I lived a mile away in a modest rental. I paid my rent on time, never called late at night, brought pies to Sunday dinners. I only ever wanted to be included. I was not expecting medals or tributes, just a seat at the table. But slowly, my presence became background noise. That wooden box I brought with me that Saturday, it was not just a collection of heirlooms. It was a small museum of my love and labor. The ink pen was Henry's, used to sign the loan papers for our first home. He used to joke that the pen had more power than his own handshake. The embroidered handkerchiefs were mine, stitched during quiet winters when television bored me and my fingers itched to create something meaningful. And the wedding hand towels? I made them by hand, for Jenna. During her first Christmas in the family, I had spent weeks picking out the right thread, ivory and soft gold, her favorite. I sewed her initials into the corner, along with the date of their wedding. She had unwrapped them slowly, said thanks, and set them aside like a receipt she would never file. But my proudest gift was the wedding dress. I had sat at the foot of the guest bed in my old house, hours at a time, sewing lace trim onto that delicate ivory satin. I stayed up late into the night, hemming the skirt while the house was quiet, my hands working as if guided by memory and prayer. Jenna had chosen a different gown in the end, one from a boutique downtown, but I had kept the dress I made. I never said a word about it. That dress now sits folded at the bottom of the cedar chest, yellowed slightly at the edges maybe, but still intact, still waiting. All of these things, my pen, my cloth, my memories, had become junk. As I sat alone that night, in the quiet of my apartment, I unpacked the box again. I laid each piece out on the coffee table and tried to remember the moment I had first touched them. Not because they were valuable in money, but because they were valuable in meaning. They carried fingerprints, laughter, and the softness of decades. But now, all of it had become a burden. That was the word I could not shake. A burden. I thought back to Jenna's eyes when she said it, how she looked through me, not at me. How she had dismissed not just my things, but everything I had ever tried to pass on. That necklace? Dusty. My photos? Creepy. My stories? Too long. What she saw as clutter was to me continuity. What she called sentimental nonsense was the only way I knew to say, "I love you," after the people who used to say it to me were gone. But that night, as I sat surrounded by the physical proof of a life once cherished, I finally admitted something to myself. In their eyes, I was not the family matriarch. I was the storage closet. I was the one they smiled at to be polite, then rolled their eyes behind. I was the woman who paid for the house but was never invited to pick the paint color. I was the ghost who came to dinner, who asked too many questions, who always had one story too many. I clutched the pen in my hand and stared at the photograph of Henry in his Navy uniform, and I whispered the question out loud. When did I stop being welcome? There was no answer, of course. Just the buzz of the refrigerator, the hum of the heater, and the echo of a door that had closed long before it ever slammed. They had mistaken my softness for weakness, and I had mistaken proximity for belonging. But that night, I began to see things clearly. If my stories no longer had a place in their world, then perhaps my presence no longer needed to orbit theirs. I would not beg to be heard. I would not shrink myself to fit into a space that now felt like a shrinking box. They called my memories clutter. They called my treasures junk. But I called them mine, and mine they would remain. That evening, after the last car had pulled out of the driveway and the porch light clicked off behind me, I carried my suitcase and that old cedar box back into the room they had given me, the so-called guest room, though it had never once held a guest. It was once a storage room, tucked behind the laundry, no windows, one lamp that flickered when the washer ran, a mattress on the floor. No frame, no closet, just 4 cold walls and silence. My bones ached as I sat on the edge of that mattress. My knees popped, a cruel reminder of age. But it was not the ache of years that sat heavier. It was the ache of realization. That somewhere between doing what was expected and giving what I thought was love, I had been packed away with the rest of the forgotten things. In the corner, beside an old vacuum and boxes labeled Xmas junk, sat my belongings. My hand-stitched quilt, now covered in lint, the porcelain bowl from my mother's pantry, cracked and carelessly stuffed in a bag, the box of letters Henry wrote during the war, tossed under a broken coat rack like receipts no one wanted to keep. I sat there a long time. Then I reached for the small cardboard file box tucked beneath my cedar chest, the one with the neatly labeled manila folders, all in my handwriting. I opened it slowly, pulling out the folder marked Raleigh Property, Deed and Title. I ran my fingers over the first page, the original contract. My name, Iris M. Callahan, in print and in ink. The notary seal still visible. I flipped through the rest, property tax records, payment confirmations, repair invoices. My signature appeared again and again, 50%. That is what the agreement stated. 50% still belonged to me. I had paid the down payment, helped with the second mortgage, paid for the new roof when the hailstorm hit 3 winters ago. I had done all of it quietly, gladly. A mother's love, I told myself. The plan had always been simple. Once things settled, once I was sure Jacob could handle the finances, I would sign over my portion of the house, a final gift, something to help them feel secure, to give the children a home that could not be taken away. The documents for the transfer were ready, tucked in an envelope marked, "To be notarized." All it needed was my signature and a visit to the county clerk. But as I stared at the paper, Jenna's voice rang again in my ears. "We don't need this dusty stuff. Stay in your lane, Iris, and take this junk with you." My breath slowed. I placed the contract gently on my lap and opened my journal, the same leather-bound one I had kept since Henry's passing. Its pages were filled with memories, grocery lists, prayers, and moments no one ever heard me speak aloud. And that night, I wrote, "If my name means nothing, I will take it back." The pen did not tremble. My hand did not shake. There was no rage, no bitterness, only clarity. They had assumed the house was already theirs, that I had given everything without condition. But love is not the absence of boundaries, and legacy is not owed, it is honored. That night I did not cry. I did not rehearse arguments in my head. I did not wonder if Jacob would be angry or if Jenna would play victim. I simply packed the important folders into a fireproof envelope. I tucked my necklace, the turquoise one passed down from my grandmother, into a small velvet pouch. I folded Henry's letters neatly and placed them in my bag. It was not revenge I was planning, it was reclamation. The next morning, I called First Carolina Trust and scheduled a meeting. Then I called the real estate attorney, whose business card I had kept from the time we closed on the house years ago. He answered after 3 rings. "I'm ready to revisit the deed," I said. He paused. "Miss Iris, everything all right?" "Yes," I replied. Everything's finally beginning to be. I made tea and sat at the tiny breakfast table Jenna refused to eat with me at. Across the room, family photos lined the wall, smiling faces, holidays, baby birthdays, none with me in them. That afternoon I began to pack, not in panic, not in haste, but with purpose. I folded my quilt, this time gently. I cleaned the bowl and wrapped it in linen. I labeled each folder. I wrote thank you notes to my friends in the community, and I set aside the transfer documents I would no longer be signing. Somewhere in the background, I heard Jacob laugh on the phone. I could hear him mention refinancing, talking to someone about home equity. He had no idea the equity was still mine. I closed the bedroom door. There was no storm, no screaming, no confrontation, only me and the sound of tradition being gathered not as baggage, but as treasure. The morning after my journal entry, I called a number I had not used in nearly 5 years. It belonged to Harold Keating, our family lawyer, the same one Henry and I had trusted since 1982. He had handled our wills, the house purchase, even the paperwork after Henry passed. Harold's voice had aged, but his tone still held that mix of patience and precision I remembered so well. "Iris Callahan," he greeted. "Well, this is a lovely surprise." "Not entirely lovely," I said, "but important." Within a day, I was sitting in his modest office, surrounded by wood-paneled walls, framed certificates, and the smell of old leather books. Harold adjusted his glasses as he reviewed the deed. 50% ownership remains in your name, just as we filed, he confirmed. There's been no official transfer, no signature. You're well within your rights to sell your portion, or transfer it as you see fit. I nodded. I won't be selling. Harold tilted his head. I'd like to donate it. To the Southern Women's Historical Preservation Society. He blinked once. All of it? Yes. My half. The house is no longer a home for me, but the story it holds, the quilts, the portraits, the family records, I believe. They belong somewhere, they'll be respected. He leaned back. That's a powerful gesture. No, I said. It's protection from being erased. The paperwork took time, meetings with the Society's archivist, a formal evaluation of the items I planned to transfer, my great-grandmother's wedding bowl, the embroidered sampler from 1910, a Bible with handwritten family records dating back to 1874, even the photo of my mother in her garden apron, holding a pie and grinning like the sun. It was the only photo that had ever hung in our dining room until Jenna decorated. Each Saturday morning for the next 3 weeks, I made quiet trips to the state library and the local preservation office, carrying bundles wrapped in linen, protected in boxes and cloth bags. No one noticed. Jacob was too busy with refinancing calls, and Jenna had started working from a co-working cafe downtown. No one asked where I was going, and I never offered an explanation. I wore gloves each time I packed something. I labeled everything in cursive. I took photographs. I wrote letters for future curators to understand who these women were, not just names in records, but lives woven into the heart of the South. My mother's handwritten recipe book, my grandmother's pressed flower collection, my father's love notes to my mother during his deployment. The necklace, too, that turquoise piece they called Dusty. I placed it in a velvet-lined display box. I had worn it to Henry's funeral, to Jacob's wedding, and even to Jenna's baby shower. It would not sit in the back of a sock drawer again. One Friday evening, I walked past the living room where they were watching TV. A sitcom laughed through the speakers. I paused, watching Jacob lean back, Jenna curled beside him with her phone. Neither of them looked up. I went to the hall closet, reached behind an old suitcase, and pulled out the envelope, marked "to be notarized." It had once held the documents that would have handed over my half of the house. I slid the papers out, tore them neatly in half, then again. I dropped the pieces in the fireplace, watched them curl into ash. The next morning, I returned to Harold's office to sign the transfer. He placed the final form in front of me, the logo of the Preservation Society in the top corner. "Are you sure?" he asked. I smiled. "Absolutely." My pen didn't hesitate. I wrote my name slowly, letting the ink sink deep into the page. When I dotted the I and Iris, I felt something shift, like dust lifting off a memory. "She wanted it gone," I said aloud as I set the pen down. "Now it's beyond her reach." Harold looked up. "Pardon?" "Nothing," I said, just marking the moment. That afternoon, I visited the preservation office one final time, bringing the last box, the original family tree scroll, sewn onto muslin by my great-great-aunt. The archivist unrolled it across a wide wooden table, her breath catching. "This is incredible," she whispered. "You're giving this to us?" I nodded. "I'm giving it to history. Because someone tried to throw it away." She placed her hand over mine. "We will honor it. And you." That night, I returned home quietly. The lights were off in the kitchen. A half-eaten pizza sat on the counter. I walked past it, past the photo wall, still devoid of me, and closed the door to my room. I placed my journal on the desk and wrote. "I took my place in the house, so I gave my name to the future." I slept soundly. The decision had been made. It was the last Friday of October. The air had that crispness North Carolina brings just before the leaves give up completely. I imagined they were all gathered at the house that evening. Jacob, Jenna, the kids, maybe even Travis, my nephew. A dinner like so many others I had quietly cooked for in years past, only now served without the woman who once set the table. I was not invited, and for the first time, I had not waited by the window wondering if they had forgotten. I was far away by then, sitting on a screened porch with a warm blanket across my lap and a cup of cinnamon tea in hand. From my chair, I could see the orange blush of the lake reflecting the sky. Peace made no sound, but it filled every inch of me. Back at the house, I knew they would feel something different. An empty chair, a colder silence. My absence, finally noticed, not because it was inconvenient, but because it had grown permanent. I later heard that Jenna had rolled her eyes halfway through dessert. "She'll come crawling back," she had said over pumpkin pie. "Old people don't have options." Jacob had not replied. I wondered if he felt the same certainty as she did, or if something inside him had already begun to unravel. It was Travis, my nephew, who finally said aloud what no one else dared to admit. "Has anyone actually heard from her?" He had sent me 2 messages the week before, one asking how I was, and the other more concerned. Did something happen with Jenna? I had not replied. I had nothing left to explain. Over the next few days, they asked around town. Mrs. Porter at the pharmacy hadn't seen me. Neither had the Sunday school ladies or the librarian. My room at the house remained untouched, save for the layer of dust they never noticed building behind the boxes. Jenna started to worry, but only because she thought it would reflect poorly on them. What if something happened? What if she wandered off? But she knew, deep down, I had not wandered. I had walked. With purpose. A week after that dinner, a brown paper parcel arrived on their porch, addressed in careful cursive. Jacob opened it while Jenna stood behind him with folded arms. Inside, wrapped in linen, was a single envelope. Jacob read it aloud. "I gave you a home. You gave me a corner. Now I give myself the rest of the world." There was no return address, no phone number, no sign of where I had gone. Just that sentence, written in the same hand that once signed permission slips, wrote birthday cards, and left love notes in a man's lunchbox. Jenna scoffed and walked off, muttering something about dramatics. But Jacob did not move for a long while. He sat on the edge of the kitchen chair, the letter resting in his lap, like a truth he had waited too long to hear. He called me that night. 3 rings, then voicemail. "Mom?" he said slowly. "I got your note. I guess I just wanted you to know I read it." There was a pause, and for a moment I thought he might say more. But the call ended, and so did whatever urge he had to undo years in one message. He did not call again. No one did. I was no longer missing. I had simply gone where they could not follow, because they had never asked to walk beside me in the first place. In that lakefront condo, I taped the letters twin, the original draft, to the inside of my writing desk. Below it, I wrote the date they received the parcel, October 30th, right before All Saints' Day. How fitting, because I had once been the saint in their house. Silent, constant, always giving. But saints cannot live forever in closets and corners. They deserve altars, or at the very least, freedom. And so I kept mine. They kept nothing. My new apartment sits just 2 blocks from the State Library of North Carolina. It is small, 2 rooms and a kitchenette, but every window lets in the morning sun, and the walls are quiet in the good way. No one shouts across them, no one slams doors, no one tells me what lane to stay in. The library helped me settle in. After I transferred ownership of the Heirlooms and land share to the Historical Society, they arranged temporary housing and offered me a chance to volunteer. At first I declined. I was tired, more tired than I even realized. But the head archivist, a woman named Miriam, with eyes like foggy blue glass, said gently, "We don't ask for your energy, we ask for your presence." So I showed up. Once a week became twice, then 3, then every morning. I taught a small group of women, most widowed, all over 65, how to begin their memoirs. I called it, "The First Page Doesn't Need to Be Polite." They laughed at that. But they understood. We wrote stories about things that never made it into family scrapbooks: burnt pies, miscarried babies, men who left, and the women who stayed. Sometimes we cried, sometimes we just sat, letting silence tell its version before words came. I hadn't known I had so much left to give, or that anyone would want it. Then, one Thursday in spring, Miriam asked me to meet her in the main hall. I thought we were reviewing someone else's writing submission. Instead, she handed me a printed invitation. Outside Women in Time, grand opening, Saturday, 5 p.m. Special guest, Iris May Dalton. I stared at my name like it was stitched on a coat I had not worn in years. "What is this?" I asked. Miriam smiled. "Your story belongs in more than one drawer." I arrived that Saturday an hour early. My hands trembled, but I wore the pale blue blouse with pearl buttons, one of the few things I had kept. Miriam greeted me with a name badge and a soft hand on my back. "Come see," she said. The main exhibition room was glowing with warm lights and polished wood floors. At the center, inside a glass case, were my things. The turquoise necklace passed down 4 generations of women in my family. The wedding veil I embroidered by hand in the year Lyndon B. Johnson was president. The first page of the family tree, scrawled in fountain pen by my grandfather in 1912. And beside them, a black and white photo of my grandmother sitting on the porch with her sewing hoop, her fingers halfway between strength and story. Below it, a bronze plaque, donated by Iris May Dalton, in honor of every woman told she was too much, too old, or out of line. I could not speak. For a long time I simply stared, one palm resting on my heart, the other tightening around the handle of my purse. The crowd filtered in, people of all ages, some with notebooks, others with tears already shining. A few women came up to me. "You're Iris?" they asked, almost whispering. "Thank you for not letting it disappear." At 5:15, Miriam tapped the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for being here tonight. We are proud to present Southern Women in Time, a collection of artifacts, memories, and voices that shape the hidden foundation of our state's heritage. And tonight, we welcome a woman who turned silence into legacy. Please welcome Iris May Dalton." The applause startled me, not because it was loud, but because it felt honest. I stepped forward. The podium seemed taller than I remembered. I adjusted the microphone, then glanced once more at the necklace in its velvet cradle, and I began. "She tossed my suitcase," I said, my voice steady, so I unpacked where I was wanted. The room fell silent. I brought pieces of my family's past into a home that rejected them. I was told our traditions were dusty, that I needed to stay in my lane, and for a time, I believed it. I packed my story into cardboard boxes and accepted the corner I was given. But history is not junk. It is breath, it is blood. It is the reason my name even exists, and when someone told me it no longer mattered, I realized maybe it didn't to them. But it still mattered to me, so I gave it to the world instead. A few people wiped their eyes. I saw an elderly black woman nodding in the front row, her hand clutched around a cane carved with initials. A teenage girl beside her recorded everything on her phone. "I didn't come here tonight to talk about revenge," I continued. "This is not a story about payback. This is a story about worth. Mine, yours, every woman whose voice was set aside for the sake of comfort or convenience." I stepped away from the podium and they clapped again. I did not cry. I had already cried in private, in the dark, in the passenger seat of that taxi when I left. This was not a moment for tears. This was a moment for being seen. After the speech, someone brought me a plate of fruit and tea. I sat at the edge of the room, watching young women lean in to read the family tree. One child pointed at the necklace and whispered, "It's like something a queen would wear." No child in my family had ever said that, and I smiled, because that night I was no one's burden. I was history, remembered, They came on a Thursday morning. I saw them through the front glass doors of the library. Jenna in a sharp white blazer, like she was walking into court, and Travis, trailing behind, with his hands stuffed in his coat pockets, his eyes down. Miriam looked over at me from the front desk. "Friends of yours?" she asked. I closed the book I had been cataloging. "Something like that." They did not make an appointment. Jenna marched straight to the main hall and stopped in front of the glass exhibit where the necklace lay nestled beside my grandmother's veil. I followed a few steps behind, silent. "This is ours," she said, loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. "These are family items, private property." Miriam approached her gently. "I'm sorry, ma'am. All of these items were legally donated by Ms. Iris Dalton. We have the documents on file. You're welcome to review the public record, but they're part of the state archive now." "You're lying," Jenna hissed. "My husband is her son. We deserve these back." "She's been manipulated." Travis said nothing. He just kept looking at the necklace, like he was trying to remember what it used to mean. I stepped forward, my voice calm. "No one manipulated me. You just never asked what mattered to me." Jenna spun around. "You're seriously okay with strangers gawking at our family, turning our history into some museum attraction?" I smiled, gently, but without apology. History only becomes history when the living forget to honor it. I offered it to the people who remembered how. That afternoon, the local news picked up the story. North Carolina woman donates family heirlooms to public exhibit, sparks family feud. I refused interviews at first, but when I saw Jenna on social media claiming I had been coerced and manipulated in her old age by liberal institutions, I agreed to speak. The reporter was polite, a young woman, maybe in her 30s. She asked careful questions. I answered plainly. "I wasn't coerced," I told her. "I was erased, piece by piece, until I chose to leave and give myself to a place where stories are preserved, not dismissed." She leaned in. "Do you regret giving up your inheritance?" I laughed softly. They never wanted it. Not really. They wanted what it represented. Control, legacy, something to call theirs without the burden of gratitude. "And what would you say to those who think tradition should stay in the family?" I paused, looked directly at the camera. "Tradition isn't inherited," I said. "It's honored." And they never honored it. The clip went viral overnight. Thousands of comments poured in, some scolding, many supportive. Elderly women from across the country wrote letters to the library addressed simply to Ms. Iris, the woman who chose dignity. One man even emailed to say the story reminded him to take his mother's stories seriously before it was too late. I never responded to Jenna's online outbursts. She called me bitter, said I ruined her chance to give meaning to her children, but I had given them meaning. She just did not like the way it skipped her hands and landed in mine. A week after the interview aired, Travis came to see me alone. He did not bring flowers or apologies, just sat on the bench outside the library while I ate my lunch. "I didn't know you were hurting that much," he said. I looked at him. "My son, my only child." "I told you," I said gently. "You just stopped hearing me." He nodded, looked away. "So it's all gone?" "No," I said. "It's all where it belongs." He did not argue. He stood, gave a soft nod, and walked away. And I watched him go without bitterness. Some stories don't need revenge, just a place to rest. It was a sunny Saturday in late spring when the library staff hosted my 80th birthday. I had not asked for it, they insisted. "Mrs. Iris," Miriam said, "you gave us a legacy. Let us give you a little celebration." They decorated the lecture hall with garlands of pressed lavender and old photographs. Some mine, some donated by other women who had joined the Southern History Project since it began. On the main wall hung a framed quote in calligraphy: "What you do not preserve will vanish without memory." People came, a lot of people, more than I ever expected. Former students from my memoir class, volunteers from the museum. A local high school brought 2 classrooms worth of history students to sketch artifacts from our exhibition. One little girl wore a brooch she said reminded her of the turquoise lady. That made me laugh. Travis was not there. Jenna certainly was not. But the absence no longer stung. I had already made peace with the silence. Instead, I sat with the living. At one point, they handed me the microphone and asked me to read something from my memoir in progress. I had prepared nothing, so I pulled a folded sheet of paper from my coat pocket. a piece I had written one afternoon while sipping tea and watching a little boy chase pigeons through the courtyard. I cleared my throat. Legacy isn't what you leave behind, I began. It's what you carry forward. It's the stories we dare to remember, the traditions we choose to honor, not because they were easy, but because someone before us carried them across fire to get them here. The room grew still. I looked around, faces young and old, quiet and listening. When I was asked once what I did after I was pushed out of my home, I continued, I simply said, I walked out with the name they forgot was mine. There were no tears, no dramatics, just a knowing hush, and then applause, not loud or chaotic, but warm and sustained, like a room holding something sacred. Later, a young woman approached me as I sipped tea by the window. She looked barely 20, with ink-stained fingertips and a library ID pinned to her collar. Mrs. Iris, she said shyly, what would you tell someone who doesn't feel like they belong in their own family? I turned to her slowly. You do not owe anyone your silence, and you certainly do not owe them your story. But if you ever decide to tell it, make sure it's yours, not theirs. She nodded. That's a little scary. Good, I smiled. The truth usually is. Outside the window, a group of children were scattered across the lawn with clipboards and colored pencils, drawing pictures of the artifacts they had seen. One boy had drawn my necklace, turquoise and silver, framed by yellow suns. I raised my cup of tea. To memory, I whispered, to all the names that never made it to a headline, but shaped the world anyway. To the woman who told me I was in her way, thank you. You made me walk far enough to find where I actually belong. And then, looking out at the children, their laughter echoing against the old brick walls of a building now filled with my history, I said one final thing, just to myself, but maybe to everyone. She wanted tradition gone, so I gave it to the people who will carry it further than she ever could. And I sipped, not in bitterness, but in legacy. Thank you for staying with Iris's story until the very end. Sometimes the most powerful way to reclaim your worth is to quietly walk away with your name, your dignity, and your story intact. Iris didn't raise her voice. She didn't seek revenge. She simply chose to give her legacy to those who would cherish it. And in doing so, she became more than a grandmother. She became history. If this story moved you, if it reminded you of someone you love, or even someone you lost, please consider subscribing to Grandma True Stories. Here, we honor the quiet strength, the unheard wisdom, and the unforgettable courage of women who refuse to fade into the background. Because stories like Iris's aren't just memories. They're mirrors, and they deserve to be seen. Subscribe today and never miss a truth that needed to be told. This is Grandma True Stories.